For our next segment of Community Focus, we're looking at a couple of organizations that save lives and how you can be part of this life-saving mission. There's Legacy Donor Services, Life Alliance, and Donate Life Florida. Legacy is an organization with roots going back to 1947 when the U.S. Navy established the world's first tissue bank, and this led to the possibility of tissue and organ donation for civilians. You will be amazed when you see how many ways they can use tissues and organs, not only for life-saving surgeries, but restoring independent living and self-confidence for burn victims, repairing joints to avoid amputations, sports medicine, orthopedics, trauma of all kinds. And I am really honored to welcome Legia Maranon. Legia has a personal story of the importance of tissue and organ donation and the importance of becoming a donor. She herself is a donor mom and an advocate. Legia, thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for having me on the show. I feel honored that I'm able to share my story and to share the importance of organ, eye, and tissue donation.
After having spoken to you a little bit before the program, I understand much better just how important it is. And I think most of us, we go to renew our driver's license, we see that little block that says, do you want to be an organ donor? And that's our entire experience with it. But you have a very personal story. And I know it can't be easy to share this, but your passion and your commitment to the mission is evident. And I'm going to ask you if you would share your story of how you became involved with Legacy and Life Alliance and the Donate Life.
Well, 5 years ago, my son was involved in a high-speed car accident. He actually ran into a building. So I received that call that no parent ever wants to receive at 1:59 in the morning from my son's phone. And I picked up the phone and I'm like, Ricky, it's 2 a.m. What's up? And it wasn't Ricky. It was the hospital. So, I mean, it was terrible. As you can imagine, they only told me that my son had been in an accident and I had to go to the hospital. So I got out of the house as quickly as we could. Around 4:30 in the morning, they called us to his room. And while we were in the hallway, the nurse told me that my son's brain was not compatible with life. I always say this because I think that choice of words is not great. I mean, it was just like, what? And you just really don't understand anything. And my son was right behind us in the bed, but he looked like he was sleeping. So we walked into the room and my husband was asking, what's happening? Are they going to do surgery now? And the woman was like, there's really just nothing we could do. A neurosurgeon came in to speak to us and they actually asked me to sign a do not resuscitate form because they had saved his life 4 times in that meantime that we were waiting. So I signed a do not resuscitate for my son and we would have just been done. But I realized after that my son was an organ donor and I've always been a registered organ donor. And before, when he was renewing his license, he literally called me and was like, Mom, should I be an organ donor? I'm like, of course, I've been one my whole life. Definitely be one. If we're not using it, somebody else can. And I remembered that. So I had to call a nurse and they came back and they told me, well, do you want to reverse the DNR? Because we just signed this. I go, of course. And then I started that process of donation.
And how does that work? I mean, here you are dealing with a son who you're in the last moments that you will be with him. And this has to be the most difficult thing to deal with.
It's completely unnatural. Everything is like a before and after that incident in your life. But that's why I think it's so important. If you want to be a donor, you need to register to become a donor and let people know and have that conversation. People, first of all, have conversations about everything. They want to party. They want to be cremated. They want to be in a box. They want to be buried. But nobody talks about whether or not they want to become an organ donor or a tissue and eye donor. But I remembered the conversation with my child, and I made the decision right there. But the process after that, for me at least, was better because if I would have just left it at a DNR, I wouldn't have had a little bit of extra time. So what ends up happening is it is a major process for your loved one to become a donor. It isn't just like, oh, he's going to be a donor and we're done. Because sometimes, it's almost impossible to actually be an organ donor, even if you're a registered donor. And then it takes time once you've made that decision to find matches for the person. So my son was this was Saturday to Sunday at 1:59 in the morning, his accident, and he became a donor on the Wednesday following. So I had 3 days to sort of say goodbye to my son. Even though he wasn't there, I felt better being able to say goodbye to him.
So when you say even if you're registered, you may not be able to be a donor, what are the reasons that someone might not be able to have their organs go to someone in need?
Well, last year, just to put things into perspective, over 3.2 million people passed away. And last year, only 14,903 people became deceased donors. And nationwide, about 60% of the population is a registered donor. So if 60% of everybody that's deceased was a donor, people on the waiting list would have a much better chance of receiving a match. But most common cases that I've seen are high-impact brain traumatic injury that's irreversible and you're brain dead, because you can have brain damage and still have sign of brain activity. You're not going to be a donor. It's very, very difficult to be a donor.
That's why we need so many people to register, because the actual population that becomes eligible
is
very small. Okay.
Very small.
Okay.
And then there's also, if you cannot become an organ donor, you can still become a tissue and eye donor, which my son actually donated tissue to 20 individuals.
Wow.
Yeah, and he donated his 2 eye corneas restored sight to 2 individuals. And actually, he gave organs to 5 people. My son saved 5 lives. Okay.
So this has to give you something to take with you after such a traumatic situation, losing a son, but knowing that he is carrying on by saving all of these lives and helping so many people live their life in a better way.
Absolutely. He saved people from 16 years old to 69 years old.
Wow.
Which is just, and actually, when I was this is why it's so important to let your family know what your decision is. When I was writing the paperwork, I'm Hispanic. My family's old school. My father did not want to sit in a hospital for 3 days, and he didn't want to watch his daughter sit in a hospital for 3 days. And so he was like, Luigi, let's not do this, let's not do this. And I was like, Dad, there's another family who has a person that actually has an option. What I say to everybody is, if you have a loved one that needs an organ, would you take it? I mean, if your answer is yes, then you should be registering to donate, honestly. So that moment, I'm like, there's people that actually have the option to live. My son doesn't. And if anybody can be saved because of anything that we do, then we're doing it. And another family isn't going through what we went through.